Heard the order from the bounty just came in. Higher than expected.
It's good, right?
And bad. The Navy cost us one job. Now there's this agent. Not sure where we're gonna make the numbers up.
We could hold off on the shipment to Gator. Use that stock for the Banyan.
Gator's not gonna like that.
Gator should pay on time then. Find him. I lost him. Stay alert. You're here somewhere. Lost him. Keep looking.
What do you say about getting me out of these things? Damn it! Oh, you don't got any meds, do you? Thanks. ever said about you, Navy. Come on. I know what they do with my stuff. Idiots keyed in the code in front of me.
Found Trejo. We're on the move.
Good work. Landing pad. We can evac her out of there.
Agent Trejo, Lieutenant Commander Calden
I'm
said.
not leaving till this is done.
Agent Trejo is insisting on helping clear the rest of the base.
Move it. I'll contact medical teams and her people to move inlet secure.
Understood.
And Lieutenant, make sure Trejo understands this is your op. She goes off again like what happened at the Sting, I'm pulling you.
Oh, looks like this is your show, Lieutenant. Lead the way.
Now remember that this is still very work in progress and we have a lot of things to fine tune, but hopefully it gives you an idea of how fluid the story and gameplay will be in Squadron 42. You could be dogfighting at one moment and then engaged in intense ground combat the next, or back on your home ship spending time getting to know your shipmates.
Speaking of ships, let's go to Jared for a special ship shape.
Greetings, citizens, and welcome to a special holiday edition of Ship Shape, where we give a quick rundown on what's in the ship pipeline, who's working on what, provide interviews with developers, bring you the most up-to-date news on your favorite ships working their way to release into the Star Citizen universe, and sometimes, just sometimes, I get the chance to strut my stuff and answer some burning ship-related questions. I'm your host, Community Content Manager Jared Huckabee. Behind me, you see the ship pipeline, an ever-evolving, continuously refined network of phases, milestones, and requirements necessary before a ship or vehicle can take its proper place among the flight-ready of Star Citizen spacecraft. Whether it's from design to concept, from white box to gray box to final art and flight prep, this is the process meant to ensure you the best possible accompaniment for your Star Citizen experience. In this special episode, I'm excited to report on two ships that play pivotal roles in the upcoming Squadron 42, the single-player experience set within the Star Citizen universe. Up first, let's take a look at the ship that started life as a corvette, but grew up to be the frigate we all know and love, the Idris by Aegis Dynamics.
Your ship has been delivered to the following landing pad.
The Idris is part of the UE fleet, so you got the Idris, you got the Javelin, and obviously you got the Bengal. So they're the big boys, the big guns as we called them. The original kind of idea and concept came from a collaboration with Chris and Ryan Church at the time. It started off as a much kind of smaller ship to what it is now. You can look back on the internet actually and find the original kind of concepts for that ship. It's small.
What we initially did was we kind of we set it up as a small ship basically. So we followed all the guides for small ships. So like it's divided into chunks: body, nose, left wing, right wing. We put all the hard points on it just to make sure it could function like that. And then we started working towards setting up the interior. So we tried to get all the interior objects inside it. But then that's where we started encountering some of the initial like early technical limitations, where loading the Idris was taking ages. We were using, they weren't object containers, they were something else, I've forgotten the name. But like what was happening is they were trying to load and they were loading just piles and piles of files that they really shouldn't have been doing, which was slowing everything down. So we had Steve Humphries, one of our coders, he spent a while and he set up creating these object containers which we could just compile a bunch of these items into like a chunk of the ship and then export that. And the Idris was the first ship we tried that on, and we had to experiment with like how do we divide the ship up, and we eventually, like after a few months, we settled on something that seemed to work quite well. And it's just kind of getting this kind of iterative process for all the new systems that are going in. And yeah, object containers is kind of like, it's one of the biggest that it happened with, but there's loads more going on in there.
So pretty much every bit of new tech that's come into the ship pipeline, or like volumetric fog or anything like that, has gone into the Idris first. It's been like the test ground for every other ship. It's the biggest ship and it's like the main hub in Squadron 42. So yeah, we want to get that right. It's to set the standards for all other capital ships.
It plays an integral kind of role in Squadron. It's pretty much your home that you kind of go back to an awful lot. So it needed to facilitate a lot more kind of, a lot more of the script, a lot more gameplay. So over time it kind of grew. It was one of our obviously highest priorities. So we had to work out from pretty much the inside out, like the layout of the ship from scratch, to facilitate not only kind of decent gameplay, decent gunplay, balancing the gameplay as well from a PU perspective, but also facilitating all the things that are required in the script. And that's really cool actually, because it kind of feeds your inspiration as to what kind of various areas can be. So, you know, it feeds, you know, we need a reactor room, we need a briefing room, we need a med bay, we need all these things, and it's kind of subconsciously fed into the design theory of every other ship that we've made since. So we've got these kind of archetypes now that we really kind of push through as much as possible to make sense of each ship, and I think the Idris was the first to do that correctly.
Beyond being a ship, it's almost a flying level. I mean, there have been, I've heard discussions of people being like, oh, we could totally turn this into like an F-18 in space because the ship's so big. And maybe one day that'll happen, maybe they'll do something like that, but like, it's huge for a player ship. When I first started on it, I got lost in it, and I'm not ashamed to say I still get lost in it every now and then. You'll walk out the kitchen and be like, do I turn left or right to get to the nose of the ship, you know? We were putting a bunch of things to increase usability, so like the different sides are colour-coded, one side's green, one side's red, and we got signposts everywhere.
I don't think people realise how much this ship has. I think there is a lot of hidden places that people just don't realise. Like pretty much every bit of the interior of the ship has been covered. There is not. We're actually struggling to find places to put more things into it because we're limited on the exterior. Basically, we needed to get some airlocks into like the front section of the ship, and we're like, okay, where can we put these? We can't put them on the side because of the angle of the front of the ship, so we've had to put them going up. But there's a lot of space on the exterior part at the front, but on the interior parts, it wasn't. Yeah, it's a bit tricky. We have to juggle a lot of rooms around and stuff and remove certain sections of the ship that didn't make sense anyway, to fit certain rooms into it, and just rejig things around. And I think it's all for the better.
Because this ship is like very heavily used in Squadron, the interior was kind of set in stone when I first went onto it. So for a lot of the newer ships we've had set up, we've kind of been able to set up like, this is the engineering bay, this is the living quarters, whatever. For the Idris, it's also very small. It's not quite that clear cut. It's kind of everything's right next to each other and it's all very sort of tightly packed into the ship. But I mean, you start off with the hangar at the very base of the ship, and it's huge. You can fit 3 ships in there, and there's cargo capacity along the sides of the hangar as well. Along with cargo lifts to go up into the hangar bay on the floor above, but you then have like a couple of staircases which will take you up to the main deck of the ship. Pretty much everything else on the ship is. At the nose, you've got like turret rooms, you've got the medi bay. Behind that, you've got like the living quarters, the captain's quarters, the kitchen, and behind that you've got the more engineering side of things. So you've actually got the engineering room itself. There's airlocks back there. There's a briefing room as well if like if you want to just like talk to people and sort something out for the rest of your crew. And at the top, you've of course got the bridge, which is its own like self-contained beast with 11 seats in there, plus a radar, or the hollow globe. It's just big and complicated.
It had a lot of interesting challenges. I think the original version of the hangar had, for example, like the main access for the hangar was right in the middle of the hangar. Like these ladders came down out of the ceiling, which baffled me at the time. So it was really kind of working out kind of interesting ways where you can clear that runway space, and it is a runway at the end of the day, but also open up access to, it's the heart of the ship, so open up access to the rest of the ship. I was very kind of keen at the time to open up as many kind of portals of opportunity, I kind of call them, where you can see through into other sections of the ship. So you can walk out of the hangar, for example, you can walk for a good 5 minutes, and you kind of double back on yourself, and all of a sudden you're looking back down into the hangar. And there is a degree of, you know, when you land, you look up and you can see these areas, and it's like, okay, I want to get there, which feeds into the narrative of certain kind of chapters in Squadron as well. So it's really kind of cool to just kind of link all that together. So when you're in this kind of hectic kind of hangar environment and you're looking up and you've got this kind of cool, calm habitation area, the two conflicting is quite an interesting thing to look at. And it makes the ship feel, even though it's huge, it kind of makes it feel a bit more personal.
So we had many challenges, because we had obviously Squadron 42, which it features heavily in Squadron 42. It's your home base. It's where you come back to after each mission in the game, and it's where you can have a lot of downtime to get used to talking to other characters, getting to know the people on the ship, just try and get like this like emotional like connection with everyone. It's your main base essentially. So Squadron 42 is probably one of the main ones we've been gearing it towards, and then the persistent universe is just stemmed from the Squadron 42 version of the ship. Collaborative gameplay is probably like where this ship is going to excel in compared to other areas. You're going to need a big crew to run the ship. It's not like any other ship in the game. You're going to need a hefty crew support with this ship. You can't run it on your own. It's so big. To get from one point to another can take 5 minutes, and you're going to need to be able to communicate with the rest of your party.
You need a crew to really fly this thing. We've got a bunch of like seats on the bridge, and what we've done is each seat has a different priority. So the pilot seat has priority over the pilot seat is then left unoccupied. If you have a co-pilot seat in the co-pilot seat, they have priority on the engine. So the pilot can, I don't know, if they get killed or go away or something, then the co-pilot will take control and do a lot of the flying for you. But they also will be able to do their own thing with their terminal. Then you have the weapon seat, which controls the gun. But the pilot can also control the gun if the weapon seat isn't being used. There's this sort of interlaying like dependency on the seats. So it's worth having multiple people just because there's going to be a lot to do and one person won't be able to do it all.
It's pretty much got what other ships have, but it's just on such a larger scale that I think it's going to hit people's like nostalgia of old like Star Wars movies. I think that's my most exciting part.
We have a kind of ongoing little giggle about it. It kind of is good at everything. Like there's nothing that I don't feel it's particularly weak at for that size of ship. You can carry obviously three kind of Gladius small-sized fighters in the hangar. We also have the Argo utility vehicle, which tucks into like a sub-deck underneath the ship, which is really interesting. It kind of drops down like the Aliens dropship scene, which is sweet. And then you've got pretty much everything else that it can do as well. You've got multiple turrets across the top and the bottom of the ship. You've got a huge railgun at the front, plenty of cargo space to the side of the hangars. It's a level, there's so much stuff in this ship that's actually physically flying through the universe with people sat in it, and all the VFX are staying with it, and all the fog's staying with it, and all the usables are staying with it, and all the components are staying with it. Everything in there moves and is interactable, and this thing's flying at light speed through space. So it's really impressive, and you just get these moments like when we were playing, you know, that demo over and over and over again in the run-up, and then you get these breakthrough moments where they switch the camera to one guy at QA, and he was just sat there looking out the side window of the bridge, and they were just leaving orbit, and you're just like, okay, but you get these moments that completely kind of change your attitude, to things, and it kind of makes you want to go even further. It's hard, like it is really hard to do that stuff, and you can kind of, it takes its toll on you as an individual, but then you get these moments and you're just like, yes, this is what makes it all worth it.
The Idris, originally envisioned by celebrated concept artist Ryan Church, is one of the signature ships appearing in the upcoming Squadron 42. I'm pleased to announce that much like the Javelin we discussed last month, due to its size, the Idris is in all of final art phase, where in the hands of the Squadron 42 art team, they're currently working on the various set dressings and special lighting setups necessary to turn it into one of the many cinematic locations you'll visit in the game. It's this combination of immense size and impressively cinematic Squadron 42 game needs that means there's still plenty of work left to be done before this vessel moves into flight prep. But you can be certain, when that time comes, we're going to let you know. Moving along to another ship playing an important role in the story of Squadron 42, let's take a look at the current rework of the little penguin that could, the Aegis Avenger.
The Avenger is one of the original, way back in the day, ships that went into the game. It was actually me that kind of concepted that one. I think it was in record time back then. It's funny. The original uses it was essentially like an old school police vessel back in the day that got repurposed. It was at the time it was sort of very kind of favourable to bounty hunters because of its large cargo space at the time. In the back. Over time that progressed where we've got several different modules that you can plug into the rear. So you've got the cargo space, the bounty hunter space and the EMP stuff, which is super interesting. But as with all things in the UK, we decided that the ship wasn't big enough, so we decided it needed to be scaled up. It wasn't just for the sake of doing it. Like the main reason for that is since 3.5, 4 years ago, the game's progressed an awful lot. A lot of the ship mechanics have come in that we didn't really kind of know about back then. So, for example, like the ship components have gone in, and by the time you put the ship components into what was a small ship, you've got no room to manoeuvre. And it was very tight anyway. The original Avenger had that kind of crouch space in the middle. So we wanted to get away, do away with all that, and basically make the ship easily traversable, either in gravity or in zero gravity. By expanding the middle section and kind of building that out so it can, accommodate all the components from tech design. You can sleep there, you can walk there basically, rather than having to go into this kind of crouch pose, which created all sorts of collision issues. Yeah, that's all gone now.
The changes we've been making on the Avenger have been bringing the textures and shaders up to a higher quality, adding a little bit more grunge, because it's kind of one of those workhorse ships of the UEE. It's the Advocacy's main combat vessel, and I wanted to look like it's been around a bit longer and seen a bit of action effectively. So we wanted the textures to have a little bit more grunge, things look a little bit more worn, a little bit kind of more used effectively, and we wanted just to polish up the geometry on the ship as well, just give it a slightly cleaner aesthetic without kind of losing any of the design cues that people enjoy about that ship already. Biggest challenges with the Avenger was scaling it up whilst not kind of distorting the design in any way. You still wanted the cockpit and spaces to feel quite enclosed, but we didn't want to change the proportionality between the bounds of the cockpit and the ship itself, because it's all quite intrinsic in the proportion of the design. So a lot of that has had some rework and some back and forth, but I think we're quite happy with where it is currently.
The interior has got a lot bigger. Whilst we've done this rework, we obviously wanted to fix the component issues. We wanted to sort the middle section out so it's traversable easily. The cockpit's generally got a little bit bigger, so the camera's got a bit more room to manoeuvre in there. And we've also sorted the rear ramp out, so there's no collision issues there now, especially with the new compression system coming in, because we're finding with a lot of the ships, once they compress, that whole metric that you work to kind of goes out the window, so you have to give yourself a bit more of a buffer to work with, which we've done here. So should you land quite heavy on to get in that ship, no problems.
The Avenger, before we ever built the interior for it, wasn't meant to have an interior in the first place. I think it was just the cockpit. and then that was kind of retrofitted, and now revisiting the ship, we felt that making it a little bit bigger and making the space inside more practical was worth the effort. So we've gone back in and we've done this ship.
We've got the 3 different variants. We've got the Stalker, which has the prison pods in the back, and it's the one where you put people in there. We've got the Titan, where it's a cargo ship, so you can put a limit. It's not got the biggest cargo capacity, it's still a fairly small ship, but you can put cargo in there. And then we also have the Warlock, which has replaced the entire back area with an EMP device.
That whole kind of system came about really from the Retaliator stuff that we've done, where we started thinking about, like, you have like different versions of the ship in the game, should we say, without having to kind of go in and redo the whole ship all the time. Obviously that's very kind of labor intensive and kind of it's intensive on the engine as well. So it's really about kind of swapping sections out as quickly as possible. So the EMP was, I think it was done 3 years ago now. And it's massive, like it's the ship's main kind of weapon, should we say. It completely replaces the whole cargo space or the bounty hunter space. Cargo space is what it is. I mean, it's just not too much more I can say about that. And then the bounty hunter, what's really interesting about that is the way that you can configure the rear of the ship. So you can have 6 of these pods, cryosleep pods, where you kind of chuck people in, or you can potentially have 3 on one side and then clear the other side for cargo, vice versa. So it's kind of quite customizable, which is kind of interesting.
But it's also not incapable when it comes to combat. It's a medium-sized sort of ship, so it's quite maneuverable, and it will be quite versatile when it comes to finding yourself in a combat scenario.
I think it's one of those where it'll make quite a good sort of entry-level fighter. So anyone that's just got into the game, you're quite enjoying you start a ship and you'd be like, oh, I want to move on to a bigger ship. I think the Avenger, if you don't want to spend as much as on the Gladius side, the Avenger would be quite a good next step for you. And also, if you want a ship that can do a few things, it's like, get the Titan. It's got cargo space, so if you want to move some cargo, you've got a ship that can do a bunch of things, and it's not too expensive.
I believe, obviously, yeah, there's going to be missions where you're going to have to kind of go out and capture people. Long-term solution with, obviously, within the PU now. I mean, that's definitely for Squadron. That's something that will come about. So those kind of mission types will, I imagine, turn up in the game. Like I say, I'm not a designer, so I don't want to speak for those guys. But also, I can imagine that there will be wanted signs up for various people, like real players, so if you can catch them, which makes it quite exciting. And so yeah, we'd be slinging them in the back of the Avenger or the new one or the other.
I find myself wanting to put a giant bullhorn on top of it and fly it around the galaxy like I'm a blues brother in the Bluesmobile. Am I the only one? It's one of my favorite movies, don't judge me. With the continuing development of Squadron 42 necessitating a rework on the Avenger 42 art team and in the final art phase, specifically the final modeling and surface tweak stage. Now when that team has completed their work, it will move back to the Star Citizen art team, where they will make any adjustments necessitated for the specific use within the persistent universe, before it then moves on to flight prep and then its eventual release into your hands. I just need to convince them to add an item port to the top so I can advertise my own rhythm and blues music review. It's a good movie. From the soaring adventures of Squadron 42, we travel through the tough terrain and terrestrial trade of Tumbril. Yeah, with an interview about the latest concept offering from our newest manufacturer, the Tumbril tank. Let's take a look.
So the Tumbril Nova, this is our first sort of trip into looking at large military vehicles, land-based vehicles. So this is the heavy tank.
It's a really big tank. It's bigger than many tanks I think exist right now. This is like a 12 meters long, 5 meters tall, 9 meters wide tank. So this is pretty big. This allows the player to stand upright in the tank. He won't have to crouch or to have some weird stance like in the Rover or some other vehicles.
So this is built by Tumbril, which is a relatively new company in terms of the sort of art style that we've been working with. And this is the large battle tank, basically. So this is like the size of a small British house.
Tumbril apparently has been making tanks, military hardware a long time ago. We've introduced it with a Cyclone, and at the time I think we've teased that it did tanks in the past, and this is, well, one of their best designs. This is a super heavy tank. It's really well armed, really well protected as well. Yeah, it's obviously good against other ground vehicles, but also made to be able to defend itself against spaceships if needed. We got 3 different weapons on the Nova tank. We got a big ballistic cannon at the front, like most tanks, where basically you can't fire. It's made for ground vehicles because it will be probably too slow to track spaceships and stuff like this. We got 2 laser repeaters, which is basically the same loadout that the Land Rover or most turrets or stuff like this. And then we got a new kind of missiles that is on the tank and that is made to defend itself against the ships. It has also some countermeasures, but this is more like if you get a missile alert from a spaceship, you can defend yourself.
Please proceed to assigned landing bay.
Yeah, this is just basic defense.
And it's sort of a modular, modular construction, so we're going to be able to swap out the main turret for different abilities. The modularity mainly is in just the 2 sections. So you've got the main turret and then the body. So the body is the sort of the main rolling chassis. And we can swap that out. Maybe that you have 2 huge rail guns. Maybe you've got anti-aircraft. Maybe it's like just a whole salvo of missiles. I guess that's to be sort of worked on and figured out as part of the whole gameplay experience. And in terms of construction, it's quite, there are similarities with the buggy, with the Cyclone. The Cyclone was the first of the Tumbrel vehicles, and that one had a very sort of signature, sort of exoskeleton almost. Like you had a framework that was very visible, that ran around, and then everything was sort of bolted onto it. Obviously with a tank, you want it to be heavy, you want it to feel robust. So that frame isn't visible from the exterior, but it is from the interior. So a lot of the sort of line work and design theory is more visible on the interior. So again, it's got that sort of almost modular feeling. So like if you wanted to repair it, you could just swap parts out and bolt them back in.
The exterior is a bit special. We wanted to show that, well, this is an heavy tank, so it have a big armor plate. The turret is separated from the body, so the gunner is not going inside the turret like in some tanks that we know actually the gunner might be close to the turret. This is not the case here. The gunner is in a separate room. That is under the turret but not linked to the turret. At the front there's a driver on a gunner that works on other systems. There is enough space inside to take care of the components, like if a component starts to overheat or whatever, you can repair it or change it while you're inside the tank. There is an external door that is at the rear. You got a mini ramp and basically a door. This is a relatively easy entry point. This is not like tanks where you have to go from the top or this kind of stuff. On the side of the tank there's also side skirts, protection side skirts that will be linked to suspension, so if you move, the side skirt obviously won't stay at the same position, it will move, it will rise up with the suspension of the tracks.
We haven't gone wild with this. It's more of a natural progression. Tumbrel isn't a wild manufacturer, so we've sort of tried to keep it in fiction. And so, you look at it, it is pretty solid, but it's not, it's not full of trinkets. It hasn't got reactive armor plastered all over the sides. This thing has a shield, so we don't need to worry about that. It has got, obviously, in terms of its construction, it looks solid, weighty, like it could take a hit even if your shield goes down. But beyond that, it's relatively straightforward, I guess. It's got countermeasures. It's got some anti-personnel guns on it. It's got its main barrel, which I think is an S4, and then some like a salvo of missiles, basically for aircraft, etc. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I think that's going to give you a good shot at staying alive. And if there's a few of you in these things, then it should be pretty imposing. You know, sort of looking forward to the day when players are playing the game and you're on one of the moons or one of the planets and you're sort of looking at the horizon and then this whole battalion sort of starts creeping over. I think that's going to be, you know, that's kind of like a classic World War II moment, isn't it? You know, sort of Sahara-based kind of thing. I mean, it's going to happen in all sorts of worlds, isn't it? You know, different. You know, you're going to have cold moons. You're going to have Sahara, sandy desert. You're going to, I guess, you know, ultimately in the future, we're going to have foliage and all that side of things. So, yeah, I think it's going to be pretty cool.
Every kind of player wants a tank at some point because, well, this is a must. Make a point, a tank at some point. Many players want a tank, but I think many developers wanted a tank as well. So we're really happy and really excited about working on a tank because yeah, this is not like a simple hover or a cyclone or a bike or whatever. This is well, you've got a big tank, big protection, big guns. And hopefully we will get big explosions from that as well.
Inspiration-wise, obviously we're pulling from the Tumbrel work that we did on the Cyclone and continuing to push on that. I mean, I've said it again. For me, it's always the time. You know, it's the timelines that are tricky. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you want to cover and you want to try and figure out. You don't necessarily have all the time. So, you know, that's why I sort of see this as our sort of, you know, entry into this side of things, and we'll continue pushing it. We'll continue pushing materials and sort of working on that Tumbrel manufacturer influence. And you know, in terms of real-world reference, that's the beauty of the internet, right? In terms of, you know, there's no shortage of information on tanks, APCs, futuristic, old school stuff, and it's just sort of picking what works best for Star Citizen in terms of our influences. How do we make this tank look like it's not built in 5 years' time? People still want it, you know, everybody knows what a tank should look like, you know, so it's kind of, you know, you're always treading that line of sort of providing what people want to see in terms of traditional sense. And then I think, you know, if we want to do the wilder stuff, that's when we start using other manufacturers. That's when we can really sort of start pushing out of the bounds of what people expect a tank to be.
I really like tanks, so I'm really happy to be. It's a super heavy tank. I think if we make other